Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. Once part of the ATA tribe, you'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will get started on today's episode, where I'm very excited to welcome back to the show Ken Ramirez. Ken is the Executive Vice President and Chief Training Officer of Karen Pryor Clicker Training, where he oversees the vision, development and implementation of training education programs for the organisation, including Clicker Expo, Karen Pryor Academy and The Ranch. This allows Ken to help bring positive reinforcement training to all corners of the animal training world. Previously, Ken served as the Executive Vice President of Animal Care and Animal Training at Chicago's Shed Aquarium, where he developed and supervised animal care and animal health programs, staff training and development, as well as public presentation programs for a collection of more than 32,000 animals. He worked at Shed Aquarium for over 25 years. Ken has been training animals for over 40 years in total though, and is probably one of the most experienced hands-on trainers on the planet in regards to the amount of species, contexts, and individual animals he has worked with. This is Ken's second time on the ATA podcast show, so I'm going to invite you to go back and listen to our first episode from February 2019 to learn even more about Ken and the amazing work that he does. I'll link to that episode in the show notes on the ATA website for everyone's easy reference. But for now, and without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome back to the ATA podcast show Ken Ramirez, who is joining us from his staycation or lockdown on the KPA Ranch on the west coast of the US. Ken, thanks so much for coming back to hang out with us at ATA.
Oh, thank you, Ryan, for the invitation. I'm glad to be here and glad that we can at least connect across the world, even if we were in lockdown.
Not a bad place. Someone said the word staycation to me the other day, and I appreciate that. That might resonate with some and might not resonate with others. But I mean, the ranch, not a bad place to be on staycation.
Oh no, I feel very lucky. I have to sequester in place, but I have a 13-acre ranch. I've got alpacas and goats and donkeys and dogs and lots of space, and so it's I don't have the challenges of people who are in the big city where you can't really get out of your house at all. Here I have a lot of space to move around in, and I'm able to continue training and doing other things, just not able to see the world personally. I'm seeing everybody through Zoom meetings and Skype meetings and things like that.
And I feel staycation and lockdown, as mentioned, can have the same meaning but elicit different feelings and potentially different behaviours from us. Ken mentioned some of the ones that we're engaging in at the moment. And by using the word staycation, I totally don't mean to disrespect that. People have died over the last wee while and or disrespect their loved ones, because this is the hardest of hard times for them and for us who know them or someone who knew them, or even just being their fellow countrymen and women. So no disrespect here, because this crisis is serious. However, I do feel there are still opportunities that can arise out of the current situation. For example, as Ken alluded to, we're all learning to go online more. And Ken, I know you have grabbed that opportunity by the horns, pun intended, going live, training goats from the ranch and all. But also with KPA and your team, you not only had to realise the new opportunities available, but I feel also act as well as we all have and do it significantly quickly to implement change. So there's lots of trainers and species that are all learning to adjust to this new world. I was wondering, Ken, if you could share with us and the ATA podcast audience what this pandemic has meant for you and for KPA, the mindset that you have in thinking through everything, and talk about some of the changes that you've had to make.
Yeah, it's been a major refocusing and rethinking about everything that we do. As an educational organization, Karen Pryor Clicker Training and Karen Pryor Academy are all about getting people together to share training knowledge. So we have our annual conference, the Clicker Expo. We have our courses here at the ranch. We have our KPA courses. And of course, we have our Dog Trainer Professional certification course, which is really a really important course for us. All of those things have in-person components to them. And so we really had to think about how do we restructure. And I think when the pandemic first hit, everybody was getting different kinds of information, and how long it would last, we just didn't know. And so it took us a little while to realize that we are going to have to sort of change the way we do business, whether it's temporarily or long term. And one of the things that we did is with our Karen Pryor Academy Dog Trainer Professional program, we had students all over the world. You yourself know, because you were involved in one of our classes in New Zealand, and our final assessment and certification process for these courses, although the program is an online program, there are workshops at the end of certain periods of time where we assess students' skill level and assess their training abilities, and that is a part of how we ultimately grant certification. When we realized that people were locked down and weren't going to be able to come to a workshop, we really had to think a lot about how to structure that. And we finally decided that we were going to divide our certification process into two parts. We created a virtual certification component in which the students all gather together via Zoom meeting, and they're including their instructor, and we assess some of their teaching skills and some of their training skills virtually, where the faculty member can watch each student work with their dog, demonstrate their training, demonstrate their teaching skills, and if they pass those assessments, if they pass those certification points, we will start granting what we're calling a provisional KPA certification. It allows them to have the benefits and be able to call themselves a Karen Pryor Academy certified training partner, but it has an expiration date. It is a temporary status that we grant them because of their hard work, because of their completing the coursework, because of all of the things they did that have demonstrated to us they're quite capable trainers, because we cannot assess some of the things that require us to be live, we divide that certification up. And after they get the provisional certification, when borders open up, when we are able to travel, when we can meet with trainers in person, we will then follow up with an in-person live workshop that will allow us to assess the 3 or 4 elements of training that we were not able to assess online. And then once those students have completed that live workshop, then the provisional status will be removed, and they will then be a true, complete Karen Pryor Academy certified training partner. Our hope was that by designing this 2-part process, we serve a lot of different needs. We serve the needs of our faculty and our students who need to stay safe. We cannot require them to travel at a time when travel just isn't legal and isn't safe. But we also recognize that many of those students worked hard, studied hard, and were prepared to be certified, and we couldn't set that certification up. So that's why we decided to do the full process virtually, but call it provisional, because we felt that the high standards that we have set for our certification needed to be maintained. And there are just certain elements that we cannot assess virtually. And so we give people that provisional certification until the time when we can come and meet with them in person to assess the final aspects of it all. So we are sure that there will be questions and challenges that we will face. You, Ryan, are aware that your group in in New Zealand was the very, very first group that we did the virtual certification process with. We have more of those coming up in the next month in May, but you were the very first group to go through that process and go through that certification, that virtual certification process.
Yeah, and I've experienced it, as you say, from the person looking to get certified perspective. And one thing that I've been appreciative of during this process is, like you said, the mixed messages that some of us are getting in different locations and from different leaders and from, the leaders don't even have the information to guide us because they're just getting it in real time as well. So one thing that you've had to do, I imagine, and animal trainers all around the world are having to do, is make decisions quickly and really kind of just really pivot everything that you were doing at the end of March to what you're doing now at the end of April. I'm curious to learn how you managed that process. How did you manage to really just, because you speak so confidently about this program now, and rightly so, because you've put so much hard work and time into it. But I know many trainers are out there going, I just don't know how to do this. I don't know how to.
No, it is a real challenge, and I think that this pandemic hit at what couldn't have been the worst possible time for us, because we were literally in Louisville, Kentucky in the United States, getting ready to launch our second expo of the year. And we were getting so much conflicting information. We were following CDC guidelines, which at that time, as we were approaching a Friday start to a Clicker Expo, that Thursday in the morning, the CDC guidelines, the Center for Disease Control guidelines here in the United States, suggested that travel was still safe, except for people in the risk zones, people of advanced age or people with underlying lung conditions, etc. Other than that, travel was acceptable, and you shouldn't worry about canceling or changing anything that you do. Many of us felt, are they sure about that? But we felt like we didn't want to go with any political driven guidelines. In fact, from within our country, the government was definitely encouraging us to keep traveling and keep doing everything the same, but the CDC was suggesting that it was safe. And on that Thursday morning, when that was their guideline as of when the day started, by mid-morning, they changed the guideline and said groups should not get together of more than 50 people. And, we now know that now everybody's shut down from getting together at all, but their recommendation was if it's a group of 50 or more, you should cancel. And then they didn't even suggest that we should cancel. They just sort of left it up to us to make the decision. And we ended up having to decide that evening that we were going to postpone Clicker Expo. And several hundred attendees had already traveled to Louisville. And so that was a very difficult decision for us to make. But we did make that decision, and we offered the attendees a number of different options to try to make up for it, including giving them an option to attend a future Clicker Expo, getting a refund, or giving them access to a video on demand package that let them see all of the different things that we were doing. Meanwhile, at the ranch, we have had to cancel or postpone, actually. We've rescheduled most of our events for next year. We are hoping that sometime this summer we might be able to open up and conduct classes again. But in the interim, I started doing it live from the ranch broadcast every Thursday, which actually I believe is Friday morning in New Zealand and Australia. But here on the West Coast, Thursday afternoons, we do a live from the ranch broadcast where I have a guest come on. We talk training, we demonstrate live training, and we take questions from our viewers. And we make that episode available in a recorded format on our website. And so that is an entirely free broadcast. We recognize that people are struggling figuring out what to do with their businesses, with their clients. So our first couple of broadcasts were really focused on handling clients, handling training consults, virtually. I talked about what I do and how I consult virtually. I've been consulting virtually for a long time, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Because I do a lot of international consults, I just can't travel to Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, Japan. I can't do that on a regular basis. So I had already started doing Zoom meetings and virtual meetings, watching training sessions over video and giving advice. So I shared a lot of information about that. Then on our second episode, we had Terry Hayward, who's been doing that kind of thing for a long time. She gave hints on what she does and how she handles classes. And we both talked a little bit about what we were doing with our KPA workshops. The episode after that, we had Debbie Martin come on and talk about puppy socialization and how you can still socialize puppies even in isolation. So our goal on these live broadcasts was to give people an outlet, a place where they could gather, hear training, do something fun, not be overly panicked about what was going on in the world, but at the same time try to give helpful hints, helpful ideas as to what you can do to keep your business running despite these very, very difficult and uncertain times.
So you definitely haven't been, you've been on staycation lockdown, but you haven't been isolated. But I know there are some trainers out there who have been isolated, and who are maybe getting cabin fever, but also struggling in other ways mentally. I feel I was really excited that we have an opportunity to talk about this today, because I thought there would be value in the podcast audience hearing from Ken Ramirez and hearing that, hey, your local dog training business is struggling, but KPA also had to kind of pivot and readjust and change what they've done. And Ken's also there by himself, or in your bubble. I don't know who is there with you at the ranch. What message do you have to give to people who might be in the KPA audience or the ATA audience whose in-person businesses have obviously been modified? They're at home by themselves. They're feeling a little bit isolated, but they're also in the same boat as you, in a way.
Right. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know that I am the right one to give advice on mental health, but I will suggest that for me, I am a very private person. I'm actually very shy, and despite the fact that when I get up and teach in front of a bunch of people would never think of me as being shy. So isolation is not a scary thing to me. But even myself, I was suddenly feeling a loss at not being able to go to a conference, not being able to teach a class, not being able to see fellow trainers. And there has been a lot of solace that I have taken in Zoom meetings and getting together with people, which is one of the reasons why I decided to do this live from the ranch broadcast, because we get to see each other and talk to each other about training. I have a number of friends of mine from all over the world who've started doing these virtual cocktail hours where they get everybody together. And I remember last week I was at one of these meetings and we were all looking at each other and saying, we could have been doing this all along. Why did it take a pandemic to get us together? These are people that I haven't seen in years, and we wouldn't have seen each other whether there was a pandemic or not. But the pandemic sort of forced us to say, hey, we can get together. We can actually all meet and get to see each other. And so what I would say to people who are feeling alone, that are feeling isolated, that are feeling desperate, I think there's real value in reaching out to colleagues, and there's something special about a Zoom meeting. Even right now, Ryan, as we're having this audio podcast, we are actually looking at each other on a Zoom meeting, and there's something about being able to see someone's body language, see somebody smile or frown or grimace or whatever. You feel more connected to them. And so I really encourage people to find that support system that you can reach out to. And maybe you don't have great internet connectivity. There are those of us who live out in the middle of nowhere, but I encourage us to pick up the phone and have a conversation with people. And there's something about not feeling alone and talking with people about that are facing challenges, and recognizing that dog training is going to be a needed thing. Many people are turning to adopting pets during this pandemic, and they're going to find themselves in need of of help and need of people who can help guide them through raising a puppy or dealing with a shelter dog or dealing with any number of problems. And so I think the whole world is still trying to figure out how to make things work during this pandemic. But I would imagine that as we come out on the other side, we will learn how to do more things virtually. We will learn how to reach out to people who are not necessarily in our backyards. And I have to believe, I have to be optimistic about it, because I'm very encouraged by the way the community is pulled together. And we don't know when this is going to end, but we know that there will be an end to it. And we'll be better prepared the next time a pandemic of this type rolls around.
And do you feel that when that time comes, that KPA will continue doing live feeds? Do you think you'll just kind of revert back to what you were pre-pandemic, or do you think this has shifted the focus of the organisation indefinitely?
I don't know that it's shifted the focus of the organization from the standpoint of our focus has always been educating people and helping people train better. And that's what our expertise is. That's what we know how to do. And so we will always be focused on how to get positive reinforcement training in the hands of more people. However, will we look at business the same way? I don't think so. Do we want to go back to teaching live workshops? Absolutely. I think there's value in that. But because we've looked at what to do virtually, I think that will help us, and we'll find ways to improve that process as we move forward. As for live from the ranch, my expectation, what I'm already envisioning, is once I get back to travel like normal and when I get back to teaching classes, being able to do a weekly live broadcast is maybe not going to be practical. But I do expect that now that we've started these broadcasts, that live from the ranch every month, I expect to keep doing. I think if everything were to return to normal, I would at least want to be able to reach out to the community and provide this kind of programming and this kind of social outlet on a monthly basis. Now, we haven't finalized that yet. At this point, I don't know how long we're going to be isolating. I'm planning weekly broadcasts into June already, and I will keep doing weekly as long as we are sequestered. When it opens up, I may drop back to a little bit less frequently, but I think I can confidently say that I will be doing them pretty regularly still, because I think I'm finding them valuable. It's a wonderful way to reach out to people, and it forces me to, I put myself on the spot by being forced to train something in front of people. The first couple of weeks, I just maintained behavior. But the last couple of weeks, I was doing some brand new stuff and new training, and that's scary but fun, and I hope to keep doing stuff like that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think everyone's going to be happy with that. It's recorded on the podcast now, everyone. So, Ken, I'm sorry, but it's going to have to continue. Hey, the reason I'm asking you this, because I just know, KPA is a different business model than a lot of the people that are sitting at home listening to this podcast and run their animal training businesses, whether it be dogs or horses or parrots or whatever you're working with. But there are all of these similarities. And I'm thinking, today is the 28th of April, everyone in New Zealand, when we're recording this. The 28th of April, the world, my thoughts about my business are different than the 28th of March. And at March, I planned for April. And now I'm planning for May, rather than planning for August later this year. And so we really are, I feel like, on the balls of our feet. We've made changes, we've got into a new rhythm, but we're also still just ready to change course again if we need to. Is that how you guys are thinking about things, or have you got the model that you're going to implement for the next little bit?
I wish I could say that we had the model all figured out and we know exactly what we're going to do in the next couple of years. And certainly that's just not the case. I think we are all feeling a bit uncertain. You watch our various governments talk about what to do about when businesses can open up again, and there's so much uncertainty and so much that we don't know. And so I think it does make sense that we are, in March we were planning for April, and in April we were planning for May, and now that May is upon us, we're going to be planning for June. But I do believe that as I start planning further out, I'm now thinking about the entire summer. And as I think about the summer, I'm beginning to plan for next year. We're currently in planning right now for Clicker Expo of 2021, but we don't know what the travel restrictions will be. So what we're doing as we plan is we're trying to be more nimble in our planning. That if we're lucky and the world returns to normal, we proceed with business as usual. But we are planning with the idea of, well, what if travel is restricted? Or what if travel completely opens up, but people aren't comfortable traveling? Those are two different things. The governments may finally say, no more restrictions, people can travel where they want. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will be ready to jump on a plane and start traveling places. And so we have to plan for both contingencies. And so that's why we have started working out with our KPA certifications, a way to conduct them virtually. We may think further about how we can, the live portion that we need to do at some point. We may have to figure out a way of doing that virtually as well, but we can't do it virtually while our students are still sequestered, because a big part of that other part of the certification is seeing the students work with other dogs, seeing students deal with different distractions, watching students deal with other students. And those are things that we have to see in person if we want to certify trainers and see that they are qualified to work with other people's dogs and to handle other people. We need to find a way to assess that. And that still has to be done live, or at the very least, it cannot be done virtually while everybody is sequestered in their home. And so we are constantly thinking, what do we do if this lasts longer? What do we do in the future? So we are no different than everybody else, planning week by week, month by month. I feel that now that we've gotten past this first 6 weeks, we are now probably planning more than just a month out. We're looking 2 and 3 months out, and we're beginning to look ahead to next year. But because we have so much uncertainty about next year, we are having to make sure that our plans are flexible and nimble and that we can respond to people. We appreciate so many of our KPA CTPs who have been patient with us, that have recognized that we were in a difficult position. We didn't make a decision on everything immediately. Everybody has a different level of clarity about what is the right thing to do, but there really are so many differing opinions. We have to weigh all of that. And so as a team, we worked really closely together to say, what's the right thing to do from a safety perspective and a health perspective? What's the right thing to do from an education perspective? What are the things that we need to do to serve our community? And we're not always as quick with those decisions as some people would like us to be, but I can tell you with all honesty that we are working hard behind the scenes to think of what else can we do to help in these uncertain times. A lot of people don't realize that KPA is a small business. We like to say that we're a small business with a large footprint. We are felt around the world, and we are proud that we are known in many corners of the world. But as a company, we are still a relatively small company, and so we are hit very hard by this pandemic, and it affects us in a lot of pretty serious ways. But we have a good plan that I think is going to carry us into the future, and that is going to make it possible for us to continue providing the things that our CTPs need, and that the dog training community and the positive reinforcement training community will benefit from.
Yeah, and I guess at some points it must be hard to pull the trigger and think, is it what we need to do? But I mean, you just have to.
Yes, exactly. And I think, as I said, people approach these decisions with varying amounts of clarity. When we were doing Clicker Expo, for example, we had a couple of our faculty members who were very crystal clear in their thinking that this should be canceled. And then there were other faculty members who were like, no, there's no reason to cancel. Let's go forward. And we're trying to get all of the differing opinions in and trying to make a decision that is the right decision. And every step of the way, we come up with another thing that we have to think about. But we are coming up with new courses now and coming up with new offerings that we think might be helpful for the community. And we're going to continue to work toward that future. It just takes a little bit of time to figure it out and make the plans.
And I like one of the questions you said you asked yourself and your team. This one that's been guiding me through this pandemic, and that is, what are the things we need to do to serve our community? And is that kind of been a guiding principle to you, just to do whatever you...
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really important question because we are, we are one of the leaders in the positive reinforcement training community. There are a number of different organizations that focus on positive reinforcement, and we need to be a hopeful voice in the community. We need to be a leader in how we provide resources to the community, and we need to be thoughtful in how we do that. It's one of the reasons why we decided to do the Live from the Ranch broadcast. We felt like at the very least we are continuing to provide some free information, free entertainment, whatever you want to think of it as, that we're making available to people, and we are continuing to look at what are the ways that we can serve our community, and that's a very important question to us. But we also have to be aware that we are a small business, and we want to make sure that we keep our staff employed, and we want to make sure that we keep our faculty safe and give them the resources they need. And so it's a delicate balance. But for us, and for me especially, the most important aspect is, what is it that my fellow trainers need? What is it that positive reinforcement trainers can utilize? How can I best serve that community and help them during these difficult times? And we're always thinking about that.
Yeah, I like that. And you might not have an answer for this next question, but I'm just thinking about the listeners of the show with their dog training businesses, their animal training businesses at home. And if they were to think about that same question, what is the best way that they can support their community through this pandemic as their clients? Like, do you have any input to offer?
Yeah, I actually gave a couple of suggestions on our first broadcast on Live from the Ranch, because I feel very strongly that in a lot of ways, many of our clients are suffering right now. Our clients are facing unemployment, are facing tough times, are facing the being sequestered, and we need to be aware that they're facing that as well. And one of my suggestions is that you offer your services to anybody who wants them, and now is not the time to raise your prices. Now is the time to potentially offer those resources at a discount or offer those resources for free. Reach out to your former clients, just make sure they're doing okay. This is a time when our clients are spending more time with their dogs because they're sequestered with their dogs. And it's the perfect time to work on separation anxiety issues. It's the perfect time to work on whatever training related issues that they have. There's more access to their dogs at this time. And so I am always suggesting to people, what kinds of things can you offer? What kinds of services can you give them? And if you're available as a resource, if you're available as someone your clients can reach out to when times get better, and they have the funding and the resources to be able to hire you, they're going to be much more willing to come to you and ask you for help and pay for those services if you offered some of those services at a deep discount or for free. We all have to make those decisions based on what we can afford. We some of us can't afford to give away our services because that's the only thing that's paying for the food on our table. And so we have to be thoughtful about that. And so nobody should feel that they should do what someone else is doing. You have to do what's right for you. But I always have felt, even before the pandemic, I would always talk to clients about being a personable, enjoyable consultant. I have two friends. I always tell this story in one of my lectures on consulting skills. I know these two trainers who live in the exact same community. And and when I look at them, they're both really good trainers. One of them may be even a better trainer than the other, but they're both good. But the one trainer who, let's say she is the best of the group, she's an outstanding trainer, she is very strict with her time. She's always watching the clock. If she scheduled a client to be at a client for 1 hour, she gives them exactly 1 hour. She doesn't respond quickly to emails. She's not particularly good about texts, and she's just very, very busy. The other trainer, who is, let's say, not quite as skilled, but good, she is much more willing, if you book her for an hour, but you have an hour and a half worth of questions, she gives you that extra half hour for free. She's very quick to come back to you on email. If she's traveling by, she'll text you and say, hey, I'm traveling by your area. Do you mind if I stop by and see how your dog is doing? I'll do that for free. After a period of time, that second trainer has more business than she knows what to do with, while the first trainer struggles to find business. And I really believe it's because that second trainer is more accessible. That second trainer is there for their clients, and consequently, she has more business than she can handle because everybody wants to go to her. She may not be the very best trainer in her area, but she's a good trainer who cares about her clients. And I think at a time like this, that's when we need to show that compassion and that willingness to help. And that is going to serve you well in the future.
Yeah, I feel like those people are going to remember how you treated them when there was a global pandemic.
Right.
Hey, so where can people go now to watch the live feeds, to see the replays, and also to stay updated? Because I'm sure there's, the situation is just going to continue to evolve, and you might need to continue to evolve how you're doing things.
Absolutely. Well, to see the live from the ranch broadcasts, one, they can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I post a link to that every single week. But if you go to the Karen Pryor website, clickertraining.com, there is, on the band at the top, there is a little bar, a little place that says Watch Live, and it will take you to the live broadcast webpage. And on that page, it'll tell you who's appearing this week. And then at the bottom of the page are links to all of our previous broadcasts so that you can watch any of them anytime you like. We enjoy having people watch live because that means that they can ask questions and things like that. But we always make the broadcast available on the website. And so the actual page resides on the ranch website, but there's a link to it from all of our web pages. And at the top of it, you can go to the Karen Pryor Academy link, or you can go to the store link or a Clicker Expo link. There is a little tab that says Watch Live, and you click on that, and it'll take you to the page where it'll tell you all about our live broadcasts and what we're doing at the time.
And are you adding information anywhere about how you've updated the provisional certification? Is that something that you've got available on your website or social media, or?
It is. It will be soon. We actually sent out a letter to our current CTPs today, or at least it may not be out yet, but by the end of the day today, they will get an update about that, and we will make that available in other locations as well. As new things happen, as we change things, we are always updating things on our website to let people know what we're doing and how we're handling that. So because the provisional certification is new, literally we just finished the first workshop at the very end of here at the end of April. We are sending information out about that to everybody this week, and I'm sure there will be questions, and we will be putting out more information on our website and other places about that in the weeks ahead.
Awesome, and we'll make sure to link to all of this in the show notes on the ATA website as well for easy access. Hey, Ken, another aspect that I found in this pandemic is it's required people, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but it's required people to really step outside of their comfort zones, using a lot of video calling, which for some people is not something they necessarily have a large reinforcement history for. It's meant
That's for sure.
It's meant people have experimented with going live on social media, a potential situation that makes some people quite vulnerable. And you've mentioned that before. You've had to step in and train live with an animal in front of an online audience. And I've sat and watched in absolute awe and been greatly inspired by courage that I've seen people show in taking these challenges head on. I've sat here on my computer and talked to people on Zoom who have been in tears. I've been in tears myself after speaking to some people. One thing I've found that's really helped not only me but also others I've engaged with over the last month is knowing that so many others are in the same boat. and are also feeling vulnerable and are also needing a lot of courage. Therefore, in considering what else to ask on today's episode, I was wondering if you might share a time and/slash your experience in your career where you felt vulnerable, exposed, open to criticism, and nevertheless you bravely persisted, and what this experience taught you, especially about these two words, vulnerability and courage.
Well, that's a big question, and I actually can think of a lot of situations in my life where I felt very, very vulnerable and exposed. As to the question of where I bravely carried on or had courage to carry on, I don't know about that. That's a harder one for me to evaluate. But there have been. It's hard for me to articulate clearly how many times I have been put in a very difficult and very emotionally raw situation. Three of them come to mind, and I will articulate what they were, and then maybe we can explore one or two of them in depth. You are aware that for many years I worked in the zoological profession. I still consult in the zoological field, and oftentimes there are animal rights groups and animal activist groups who are very vocal about their dislike of zoos and the fact that they feel they should shut down. And constantly, because I was in a high-profile position and at a very large zoological organization, I was constantly coming under fire and had to go in front of the press and in front of people and answer questions about things that were very, very difficult. I had, in some cases, death threats leveled against me. I had all sorts of challenging issues, and going in front of a lot of people to try to defend a position that not everybody agrees with was very difficult and very hard for me, because I feel very passionately about what I do, and I feel very strongly about the kind of work that I do. And to have people think that it's bad, or think that it's evil, or think that you're doing something wrong is very hard. It's hard on the psyche. It's hard emotionally. It can make you feel like you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, because you're going to have this fight and this struggle to try to explain that to people. What's interesting is I had a similar situation in working with Karen Pryor clicker training. And I think, well, I'm in the dog world and everybody loves dogs, and who's going to be opposed to what we do? But there is a similar divide in the training community in which people can be quite passionate about positive reinforcement or the use of punishment. And even within the positive reinforcement world, there are many, many divisions in that community, from those who claim that they use nothing but positive reinforcement and that there's no punishment should be involved at all, to the more realistic approach where, yes, positive reinforcement should be your approach. I would never put a training plan together that includes anything but positive reinforcement. But the reality is that there are punishers in this world. And as someone who feels strongly at trying to make training better and to create a better training environment, I consult with law enforcement. I consult with guide dog organizations. I consult with organizations that still use some aversives, that still use some punishers. And I've been severely criticized by some in the positive reinforcement community for doing that, for working with those individuals. But again, I felt very strongly that if we want to see people embrace the use of positive reinforcement, we have to be willing to work with those who don't currently use it so that they can see the value of it and learn the positive outcomes that can come from using positive reinforcement. But I was again surprised at the vitriolic nature of people who hated me for being willing to work with those individuals. And there's nothing worse than dealing with hatred in whatever form that it comes, because it makes you feel small, it makes you feel vulnerable, it makes you re-examine what you've done and wonder if you've done the right thing. And then there's a highly personal story. So those are two examples in my professional world. And a third story happened after 9/11, when the World Trade Center was bombed. Two airplanes flew into the World Trade Center, and I had to deal with that on two different levels. I had a very close friend whose kids I am the godfather of, who died in that awful day, and at the same time, I was working with the search and rescue group, and I was working with the search and rescue dog who was deployed to the World Trade Center to look for survivors and look for victims, and that was at a time when I was very raw. It was very raw and vulnerable for me. I was devastated and so broken up by the loss of my friend. The whole country, our whole country in the United States, was reeling from the impacts of that disaster. And meanwhile, my job, one of the things that took me to that World Trade Center, and I had to deal with the sadness that was overriding the site was terrible. Everybody felt sad. There was still smoke coming out of everything weeks later. And we are working on that site, and I'm looking for people and finding people, while at the same time knowing that I lost a dear friend at that time. And it was a time when it was really easy for your spirit to be crushed and to feel so helpless and so ineffectual. And there were a lot of very difficult, vulnerable feelings that I was dealing with at that time. But yet, in some ways, having a dog who was trained to search for people gave me a purpose and gave me a goal, but it was still a time when it was really hard. And I'm sure if I thought about it, I could think of other times when I have felt vulnerable, but those are three very distinctly different instances that really were emotionally charged, difficult for me. I was feeling very vulnerable, and I felt like one wrong word could have caused me to crumble, but somehow I didn't crumble, and I always tried to find a way to combat it with a positive perspective and to try to really know what I believed in and knew what was important to me. And that was important because that was the only way that I could carry through with some of these really difficult situations. I don't know if I've given you good enough, if I've answered your question. I've just sort of shared with you what those three situations were. If you have questions about any one of them, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I think you've shown courage in sharing them with us. And I'm glad you brought up the divide between lines of thought in regards to tools that we use in our industry and the similarities between zoos and other species and other industries. And you said at the start that you didn't think that you potentially could offer thoughts on the courage side of the question, but you can definitely dive into the vulnerability side. And I'm curious if vulnerability and courage are separable, or to work through vulnerability, it goes hand in hand that you are courageous because you did still jump in front of the camera and you did still get in the arena.
No, you're right about that. I mean, there's no question that I suppose if you define courage as, moving forward in the face of adversity, or taking on a task even when feeling vulnerable, I suppose then yes, there may have been some feeling of courage. But I think usually when you're doing it at the time, you're feeling foolish, you're feeling stupid, you're feeling, why am I doing this? Or you're feeling, why you're doing it, but everybody all around you is making you feel poorly or feeling badly. Or the reality is, in almost every one of those situations, what I tried to do is look at the positive side. There are always people who are providing you positive reinforcement. We just take note of the people that are providing punishers, and we are thinking about the punishing aspects of it, whether it be the death of my friend or the criticism from someone who doesn't believe in what I do. Either way, that criticism wears on you so severely that you may have only 1 in 100 people telling you something bad, but yet it sticks with you and you can't forget it. And it makes the process a real struggle.
And so did you find that in those times, like with your dog at 9/11, and once again, thank you for sharing that, like your mind's going, no, Ken, I can't do this. Like, but then you kind of catch yourself, you catch that thought, and then you personally can bring in the positivity.
Yeah, and in retrospect, it's a little bit easier for me to see what it was I drew on for courage, or where it was I looked for hope. And oftentimes it is always looking at family members or friends and colleagues who trust you, who have faith in you, who believe in you, and remembering to listen to them when they're giving you those words of encouragement, to listen to them when they're telling you to keep going and that you're doing well, not to discount those positive reinforcers that you're getting, because it's so easy to allow the negativity or the bad feelings of whatever the situation is to just overwhelm you. And that's the kind of thing that can plummet someone into a state of depression. And what we have to do is latch on to those people who buoy you up, to latch on to those people who encourage you and who are telling you that you're doing well, because they're the people that are going to help see you through that and help you get through to the other side.
And so for those of us sitting at home in May 2020 feeling vulnerable, surround yourself with the right people. Is there anything else you can suggest to the listeners of this podcast show from your experience to help them in this vulnerable time?
I think I think there is real value in doing an assessment of what's going well for you. Too often we are overwhelmed with all the things that aren't going well. I can't go out and visit people. I've lost a job. I'm not making money. There's all these negative things that can overwhelm us. And I think that it is really beneficial to care for yourself by reminding yourselves of things that you're thankful for, things that you're appreciative of, and every day to look for those bright spots, because that is what can help people get over these things. And as I said, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not the person to give people good advice for how to improve their own psyche. All I can do is say that what it works for me is to look at those things that I am appreciative of, and to thank those people and those individuals who bring me joy, who help me with my work, who help me accomplish tasks that I am trying to accomplish. I think that is it seems like an obvious thing, but I think so often we fail to do that, especially in a crisis. When we are facing hard times, we can't help but focus on patching things up and trying to fix it, and all we see is the disaster that's all around us. But if we could take a moment to look ahead and say, there's some good things that are going on right now, and I should be thankful for those things, and latch on to those as the things that allow me to carry on and move forward.
Maybe you could view this as a staycation where you get to stay home and go on vacation in a lockdown. An attitude of gratitude. I think that's pretty sound advice. Hey, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Ken. We're sadly at the final question for this episode. And this time, Ken, we asked members of Animal Training Academy what they would most like to ask you. And this morning before we connected, I selected at random one of those questions. So this question comes from Bex Tasker, all the way from New Zealand. And Bex would like...
I know who Bex is. I've met her when I was in New Zealand. She works with horses, and yes, I'm familiar with her.
Yeah, and she traveled all the way to Louisville, and she was excited about Clicker Expo, and Bex took on the best mindset around this, and she completely understood. But she was there, and she didn't get an opportunity to ask this question there, so I'm really glad that we get this opportunity now to put it to you. She wanted to know, do you significantly adjust your approach based on the species you're working with? And if so, what are some of the main considerations you think are important for trainers to take into account?
That's a great question, and it's interesting because I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways. Because on the one hand, I always like to tell people it doesn't matter the species, the laws of learning apply to all animals, and it's the same approach in every aspect. However, having said that, part of my reason for often saying that is that I find people get frozen by the fact that they haven't worked with a species before. I remember when I was in charge of the training program at the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, I had this really talented group of professional trainers around me, and they were training dolphins and sea otters and sea lions and so many different species. And I remember when one of my best trainers, really skilled trainer, came into my office and said, "Ken, I just don't know what to do. I'm about to adopt a puppy and I have no clue how to train them." And I said, "But you do. You do know how to train them. You understand the laws of learning, and those laws of learning apply across all species." However, having said that, there are things that I approach differently, but it isn't about the laws of learning. Those laws don't change. A reinforcer works the same with every animal. A punisher works the same with every animal. All those laws, all of those things that we've learned in our behavior analysis classes or that we've learned in our training classes really do apply across species. However, where people get hung up is in realizing that there are things that are different about each species, and we have to know what those things are. We have to understand something about the species' natural history. We have to know what they spend their day doing. We have to understand what it is that they like to eat, because that's going to change the behavior that they're willing to offer us or that they're able to offer us. You know, the analogy that I use is, if I tell you that training a dog and training a bird are exactly the same, we use the same laws of learning, and then the bird trainer who spent his whole career teaching birds to fly from point A to point B decides to train his dog to fly from point A to point B, he will fail, because he didn't realize that dogs aren't capable of flight. And while that is an obvious thing that is different between the two, it does point out the fact that you can't blindly go into working with a species without understanding the things that make it unique. Everything from what its nutritional needs are, to what it likes to spend its time doing, to so that you can make better decisions about that. And as someone who's done a lot of work, I think in the last time we spoke, Brian, on your podcast, I talked a little bit about conservation training. And as I go out to work with a species in a conservation project, I go in confidently knowing that I understand the laws of learning. But I have to admit that when I was called by zoological professionals in Australia years ago to come down to Australia and do a bilby conservation project, I happily said yes, and then hung up the phone and thought to myself, what the heck is a bilby? I don't even know what it is. I had to Google it to look it up. Or when I was called into London to do a butterfly training project, I realized I know nothing about what a butterfly eats, how they see the world, what do you use to cue them. And so there are many biological elements that are important when starting to work with the species. I come with my toolbox as a trainer and am confident that those tools are going to work. But I do need to ask myself, is this a daytime species or a nighttime species, and do they work better in the day or the night? Are they grazers? Are they meat eaters? Are they grain eaters? And can we find a reinforcer that is deliverable to them in small pieces? What kinds of behaviors do they naturally do? And what can I plan to capture, and what might I need to target train to be able to teach them? And then when it comes to cueing, the butterfly project was an interesting one. I didn't understand or know what butterflies, how they perceived the world. So I wasn't sure whether I could use hand signals, lights, sound, what was going to be the best thing to cue those animals. And so those are the aspects that are different from species to species. You really have to understand what it is that they normally do in their everyday life, and how they spend their day, and how they eat, and how they perceive the world, so that you can adjust your training to that end. And probably the most important part of training other species is spending some time watching and observing before you jump into working with them. We often forget, as people who work with domestic animals, that for the most part, an animal that's been raised around people is usually pretty comfortable with people. So you can often go to a shelter and meet a dog for the first time, and as long as he has no fear issues, he may come right over to you and start eating from you. But for a lot of other species, they may not be comfortable with people, and we often forget that the very first thing that we are going to be training them to do is just to approach, to eat from you. And most people don't plan that early. They start thinking about training as if they're working with an animal that's already approaching and already eating. And realistically, for a lot of species, you just need to figure out, how can I get close to that animal so that I can train them? Or do I need to train them remotely from a distance? And how do I do that? And what is going to be the best reinforcers? And so that's where I say the answer to that question I divide into two very separate answers. You as a trainer, if you're skilled and knowledgeable about how behavior works, can probably succeed at training any species. But if you don't go into it with helpful knowledge about what makes that species unique, you're probably going to be in trouble. So every time I've worked on a conservation project, whether it be with butterflies, chimpanzees, elephants, polar bears, bilbies, I always made sure to have several people on my team who were experts on that particular species, so that I could ask questions about what they eat, what they see, what they hear, how do they spend their normal day, information that will help me understand the species better, so that I can apply that training knowledge that doesn't change and how I can apply it to that situation. Does that answer the question, or did I go off on a tangent too much?
Luckily for you, we like tangents here at ATA, but you answered the question. I'm curious, though, can you think of a time in your career, and any time over the last 40 plus years, where, because you didn't understand the natural history of a species as well as you would have liked to, or as well as you thought you did, the project didn't go as well, even though you understood how learning works on planet Earth?
Absolutely. And the thing is, I don't know that I recognized it at the time. You go into a project, you're thinking, oh, I know what to do, and you start working and you're not seeing success. And it turns out that it's not that the laws of learning have failed you, it's that you have failed to really get to know that species well enough and understand what it is that made that particular species unique. And I constantly find and because I've worked in the zoological profession, I've had instances where that happens a lot. You think you know a species well, you go, oh, I'm ready for this, but you didn't really understand. I'm going to share a story of a colleague of mine, just because this is such a great example. I won't use her name because she may not want me to share this with you, but this was a really good example. Very skilled trainer who was being asked to do some work with some tree kangaroos, and she was a consultant, came in and helped them understand that how to use training appropriately, and she introduced them to the clicker and showed them how to use the clicker. And then she came back a week or two later, and all of the tree kangaroos were up in the tree and had not wanted to come down to work with the trainers. And one of the young keepers said, well, do you think it might be because the clicking sound that we use, the clicker, sounds exactly like a predator that usually that is a predator for these tree kangaroos? And this trainer goes, oh my God, I didn't know that. And so they were trying to click to reinforce behavior, and every time that they clicked, the tree kangaroo would run away. And that was a good example of not really understanding aspects of that particular animal's natural history that could cause it problems. And, when I was working with a sea otter, for example, this is a good example from me. I had worked with river otters most of my career. And when you present a target to a river otter, they are very similar to a dog. They're likely going to sniff it because they get their information about the world through their noses. But sea otters who live underwater don't use their nose to get information about what's happening in the underwater world. And so whenever you present a target to a sea otter, the likelihood that they will touch it with their nose is very, very slim. What they're likely to do is to bat at it or paw at it with their paw. And that is going to be the way they would approach a target. And I remember when I first started working with sea otters, I was so determined to get this nose target because that's the way I had always trained. And when I started realizing that these sea otters naturally did things with their paws, you can train a sea otter to touch a target with their paw really quickly. It can take a lot longer to get them to touch something with their nose. And so that's just a minor example of these little differences that can really change the way you approach training. And if you're so close-minded to say, nope, a target has to be touched with the nose, and you can get there, but it may take you months. While if you adapt your training to what that animal does on its own naturally, you're going to be able to make much, much better progress. And so I could start listing lots of examples like that of little things that I learned. And I felt like I had researched the animal well, but those little nuances can make a difference in setting you up for success. And so really understanding the species and adapting your training based on what that animal is more likely to do can make a huge difference. I can think of another example, and that is the rhino training, rhinoceros training. You can learn all about rhinoceros, but if you don't recognize that the black rhino and the white rhino live in very different environments, one of them lives in the open plain, while the other one lives in the forested bush. And because of that, the animal that lives in the open plain is far more comfortable with people approaching because they're used to seeing things around, and they're much more comfortable with that. While animals that live in the forested bush, any movement of anything scares them. And it's the same, generally it's the same animal. They're rhinos, but because one lives in the open plain and the other lives in the forested bush, their behavior around movement and things that they are not familiar with is very, very different. And if you're not aware of that and you go in going, oh, all rhinos are the same, you could find yourself in trouble because you're not adapting to what that animal's needs are. And the way I generally approach this is now I go in recognizing that I may not be aware of everything that I need to know. You're not going to know what you don't know. But when I walk in and start a training protocol, when I see fear, when I see discomfort, when I see an animal not responding well, I ask myself, I need to change something. I don't know what it is. I don't know why they're not responding, but it's never the animal's fault. The fact that they're not responding is giving me information that's telling me I need to adjust something that I'm doing. I need to change the environment. I'll later find out what it might be, or maybe I won't, but I at least recognize that when something fails to work, it's not the laws of learning that aren't working, and it's not the animal that isn't cooperating. It's some lack of my understanding of the situation, and so it means I need to adjust what I do. And that's what I do in situations when maybe I don't have an expert there to tell me what to do. Sorry, went off on another tangent, but you said you like tangents. So.
Passion talking, as Teresa McEwen would say. So I'm curious then, is there a common, do you feel that you see a common training challenge, any common training challenges with dogs or horses that you think are because of people trying to apply, I'm going to use air quotes here, standard training practices, and it's not fitting within the species? I'm talking about common ones that come up time and time again. Can you think of any?
Well, I think I can generally say what happens is I think that the mistake we make is assuming that we can follow a specific recipe to solve any particular kind of problem. I actually, the biggest challenge that I see is the one that I brought up at the beginning, and that is that we start thinking about training by thinking about an animal standing in front of you, taking food from you, and you begin the training process. And I constantly am finding the training needs to begin long before that. And it begins with that animal being comfortable in your presence, approaching you and eating from you. And the way that I approach that is going to be different with different animals. And I don't think that there's one size that fits all. I think this is where our understanding of the laws of learning come into play, but we have to adapt and recognize that every animal is an individual. And we have to ask ourselves, okay, how do I achieve that with this particular animal? And if it's a flock animal or a herd animal, it may be getting the group comfortable. If it's an animal that has had a bad history with people, that's been beaten or been hit or been punished frequently, it's figuring out how to gain that trust back. If it's an animal, it's recognizing that each situation is unique, and you still need to approach the situation with saying, how can I get this animal comfortable with me? And in some cases, I think of some animals that I've worked with that were really skittish. Part of it wasn't forcing the issue at all. It was saying, you know what? They're not comfortable eating near me, so I'm going to pour their food into a container, and I will leave and watch them eat from a distance and gradually approximate my presence closer and closer to the animal until eventually they relax in my presence. But it's figuring out what that solution is, and it's going to be different depending upon the environment that you're working with. But that's where I see the biggest mistake so often is we walk up and go, okay, let's start training, but we are assuming that that animal is going to be relaxed, comfortable, and ready to eat from you, when really there may be so many other things that are going to need to be done just to get them comfortable in your presence. And so that's the big challenge that I see all the time.
Awesome. I love that. Hey, I'm going to say thank you so much for all of this. Sadly, though, we're going to move towards the end. And just before we do wrap up, though, today, Ken, for everyone listening, can you just remind them where they can go to benefit from the staycation you're on and the goat you're training and tune into your live feeds, as well as stay updated with any other changes and information KPIs?
Well, the first thing I would point people toward is toward our clicker training website, our KPCT website, which is clickertraining.com. It's the easiest thing to remember, clickertraining.com. You go to the website, and there you can go to KPA webpage, you can go to the Ranch webpage, you can go to Clicker Expo webpage, and the Live from the Ranch broadcast. If you go to the Ranch webpage or any of our major websites, you can click on Watch Live, and that's where you can find out what we're doing at the ranch and see past broadcasts. I also encourage people to follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. My Instagram, see if I can remember it off the top of my head, is Ken_Ramirez_KPCT, and my Twitter is KPCT Ken? I can't remember. Oh no, I think that's what it is. I have to look it up. I don't use my own handle that often, or my own hashtag, or whatever it's called. But certainly going to clickertraining.com will take you to where you can link to the Karen Pryor Academy page to hear what we're doing about courses and things of that kind. There's a Clicker Expo page that will keep people updated on what's happening with Clicker Expo. There's a ranch page that tells people about what's going on at the ranch. And so going to that main website, clickertraining.com, is a great place to start. And I hope people will join us live from the ranch. And if people are in bad time zones or it's just not working well for you, we record them and they're available the very next day. And we plan on having them up forever, at least for now anyway. That's our goal.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for providing all of this high quality, entertaining, educational, inspirational content in this time. We will, of course, link to all of this in the show notes, everyone. Hey, Ken, this has been hopefully an important conversation to share with our audience, and additionally, so much fun. So,
well, I really appreciate you asking such thoughtful questions, and I hope you and your family and your new child stay safe and stay healthy, and I wish that to everybody.
We took Summer to the doctors yesterday to have a 6-week vaccinations, and I think that's the first human she's ever seen since she left the hospital, and they stabbed a needle into her leg. So I don't think she was too impressed by that. But once again, really appreciated, Ken, and thanks again.
Thank you.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. There's something there for absolutely everyone, and we're looking forward to having you join the tribe. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.